Hey, everybody, welcome into the Storycraft Cafe. I am your host, Hank Garner. Today, I am super excited to welcome Julie Leong to the show with us. She's got a brand new book that released today. It's called The Keeper of Magical Things. And I love this book. It is so much fun. It is a cozy fantasy. And if you are a follower of fantasy books, you might. Have recognized that this subgenre, while I will argue is not brand new, maybe in marketing terms, it's newer as we cozy fantasy has kind of become a thing over the last couple of years. And you had a book that released, was it last year, The Teller of Small Fortunes?
That's right.
And then you follow up with The Keeper of Magical Things, which releases today. And I absolutely love these books. I love what you're doing. And so glad you could join us today. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you, Hank. Thanks for the kind words, and thanks for inviting me on.
Absolutely. So because this is the Storycraft Cafe, sometimes I like to start the show with some fun questions that I call espresso shots. So there's no right or wrong answer. It's just to kind of help us get a feel for your writer brain. One question I love to ask is, what's the first story you remember writing that made you feel like a writer?
Ooh, I love this. Okay, real throwback, but this goes back to like elementary school. I
Okay.
think. And I was in one of those small groups where they pull you out of the normal class to be with a bunch of other kids that they think are smart and good at writing, whatever.
Sure.
And so we had a lot of free-form creative assignments. And I remember writing a story. I think this was 4th grade or 5th grade. But I'd grown up kind of with 9/11. My parents worked in New York, and so that was something that was a pretty, I think, formative event for our family.
Probably visceral too, I would
Yeah,
think.
I remember that day in 2nd grade getting pulled out of class and sent back home. My parents were okay, luckily, but I think I ended up processing that event a little bit by writing in one of these creative assignments a story from the point of view of a street lamp in New York
Okay.
during the events of 9/11. And yeah, I was really proud of that story. And
Wait, you were in 2nd grade and you had the
I was in 2nd
presence of
grade when
mind to.
the event when 9/11 happened. I
Okay.
think I wrote this in like 4th or 5th grade.
Okay.
Maybe.
Still, that's a really interesting way to disembody yourself to get an interesting vantage point. That's
Yeah,
yeah, that's amazing.
thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it was absolutely terrible, but at the
Well,
time, it felt like it felt like something that I was proud of and something that I was putting out
of
there. I
course.
will say, very non-cozy.
Yeah. I I would hope that it was. Let's just put it that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you believe in writer's block?
Interesting. That's like asking me if I believe in like bad weather. Like it definitely happens.
Yeah.
I guess whether or not I believe it's something that you just have to succumb to or that you can
Yeah.
overcome by brute forcing or some other mechanism, maybe is a different question. Um, so yeah, I believe it definitely happens, but I think it's not the be all end all. Like I think there are ways around it for sure.
Yeah. What is your favorite part of the writing process? Is it that first draft where you're discovering the story, or is it editing, or is it like today where the book goes out to the rest of the world and you either chew your fingernails all day or you just embrace it with, all of the chaos that it is?
It's definitely for me, the drafting part is the most fun. There's the fewest expectations. There's, no pressure to make it good. You just get the story out on paper and you don't know what's happening yet either because I'm a pretty vibes-based writer. And so I'm a
Yeah.
little bit discovering the story as I go along. And that to me is way more fun than editing. I think if anybody says editing is their favorite part, they are a dirty liar or a better person and a better writer.
Or or their brains just work differently than ours.
Yes, yes.
That's the nicest way I could put it.
Yeah. And then the launch, like today, having a book come out is obviously a tremendously exciting, rewarding thing, but it's also
Sure.
got all of these nerves jumbled up in it, and it feels like a lot of things are out of your control, and
Yeah,
being a control freak when you're drafting, you control everything you're putting on the page, and so
sure.
I much prefer that.
Yeah. I was gonna ask you one other question, and I feel like you dipped your toe into this
Okay.
just a second ago, but on the, the dividing line of where writers put themselves of either pantser or plotter, where do you live on that line? Because I'm convinced that no one is all one thing or all the other. I think we
Totally.
kind of live on the spectrum somewhere. Where are you?
I agree. Definitely a spectrum. I am further on the pantser end by
Okay.
a wide margin, but
Yeah.
occasionally, generally somewhere between like 30 and 50% of the way into the book, I am inevitably forced into being a little bit of a plotter, and then I can go back to pantser.
Yeah. Do you know the ending of your story when you begin it?
I did for Teller.
Okay.
I did not for Keeper. For Keeper, the ending actually changed quite a bit between drafts 1 and call it 4. So,
Interesting.
yeah.
Interesting. Was it a drastically different ending?
It was still a happy ending because cozy
Okay.
fantasy and because I love my characters and want them to end up in a happy place. But
Yeah.
the way that you got there and kind of what that ending looked like was, I wouldn't say drastically, but pretty significantly. Yeah.
Yeah. Gotcha. Um, from reading your bio and stuff, it looks like your day job is not as creative as writing books. One thing that I love to hear from people is, okay, I've done over 3,000 author interviews over
Oh,
the
wow.
last decade and a half,
Wow.
and out of all of those, I can I can put writers on two hands that their only pursuit has ever been to be a writer, and that all of their schooling and all of their career moves have always been to further that. Most people take a bit of a circuitous route. They go and they collect some life experience over here, and they do some jobs over here, and and all of that feeds the writer toolkit. And then one day, for whatever reason, that writing bug comes back around, and you have to write that book. What was that like for you? How did because it sounds like from the fourth or fifth grade on, you knew that you had the storytelling gene, or whatever that is, whatever it is that makes us want to tell stories. But somehow it came back around to you. What's the story of that?
Yeah. So I'm the daughter of immigrant parents. My parents both emigrated from Malaysia to America
Okay.
before I was born. And so one thing about immigrant parents is that they very much want to emphasize education and stable career.
Sure.
So I kind of grew up with that mindset, and I never really thought about writing seriously as anything besides just like a hobby or a class that I really enjoyed in school. Because in my head, I was like, all right, I've got to go to good college and get like a good practical degree and then get a nice, stable, white collar career of some kind, doctor,
Sure.
law, finance, whatever. Um, and that's kind of how I lived most of my life. And so I studied economics and political science. I went into finance. After finance, I went into tech. And I was just basically being a really good corporate cog and following this kind of responsible daughter of immigrant path laid out for me up until like 2022, which I was working at Google at the time. But then my dad got really sick. He was diagnosed with late stage cancer.
Oh,
It's a happy ending. He's in remission now,
wonderful.
very thankfully. But at the time, the doctors told us, it might be terminal. And so I quit my job. And it was my first time as an adult not working or not studying full time. And I was just, helping care for him. This was COVID also, so things were really stressful.
Yeah.
Spent a lot of time in the hospital, at the waiting room, etc. And during that time, I was looking for escapism and comfort
Hmm.
in books because I've always loved books, even if it's not something that was part of my career. It's just kind of
Yeah.
a thing that I enjoyed and brought me comfort. And so I read a lot of books during that time period. And because I wasn't working, I suddenly had this epiphany of, wait, I've got like all this spare time that I hadn't
Right.
had before. Why
Yeah.
don't I try writing my own story? And that was how the Teller of Small Fortunes came about. It was really because life threw me this curveball in the form of my dad getting sick, in the form of me quitting my nice, stable career and not
Yeah.
knowing what to do with myself, that I was finally able to kind of pursue this kind of creative space. Um, and honestly, it's been such a silver lining of everything. I'm so glad that I let myself take that chance because now the whole world of writing and being an author is something that's open to me as well, and I get to keep writing stories. So
Love
I'm
it.
really grateful for that.
Were you a fan, like as a kid or during your formative reading years, of fantasy? What was that? What were some of your early influence? What were some of the early fantasy stories that you loved?
Yeah, fantasy was always a first love of mine. I remember as a kid reading books, fantasy and sci-fi, I should say,
Yeah.
but books like Redwall by Brian Jakes. Do you know him?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, such a comfort read. Honestly, they hold up too as an adult. Sometimes I'll
Yes,
revisit
they
them.
do.
Yeah, the
As a matter of
squirrels and
fact,
beavers.
on my shelf back here, and I can't reach it right now. I
Oh,
actually found a whole set of the Redwall books at
oh,
a used bookstore just a
oh,
couple weekends ago,
what a
and I
treasure.
I grabbed them. I was like, "Oh, this is so amazing!" And
Oh, they're
I
so
have
good.
to
I
pull
remember,
them
like,
out. Yeah,
Madame Mayo. But yeah, all of those books were some of my favorites. Also, the feast scenes. Brian Jakes was so good at writing food. Like, I
yeah,
have no idea what shrimp and hot root soup is, but I want it. And, like, the
exactly.
cordials and the cheeses. Anyway, so that was an early love. The Alana books by Tamara Pierce, the Alana the Lioness books, and the Circle of Magic, love those. Harry Potter, although obviously now I have somewhat conflicted feelings about that. Um, and I think it was really around like high school that I discovered what I view to be the single most formative author in terms of like my moral education,
Mhm.
the Discworld books by Terry Pratchett.
Terry
I'm sure you
Pratchett.
know them.
Oh, yeah.
But
Oh, yes. Yes.
he's
And they're so easy to get into. There's only like 140 of them.
well, that's what I love because I actually read quite quickly, and so it's like having all of these books set in the same world, and you could just like discover different corners of the world by reading all the different series, the witches,
Right.
the guards, and he's just so brilliant. I feel like he had such an incisive way of writing about like the human experiment, and even though it's a world full of monstrous and fantastical things and trolls and dwarves, I think he was such a kind writer, really, and
Yeah.
his books are just so funny. Also,
Yeah.
yeah,
And it's Terry Pratchett is an interesting influence because I and the this quote gets misattributed all the time, and I don't know who originally said it, but that fiction is the lie that tells the truth,
mm,
and that was an interesting thing about Terry Pratchett is these made up stories, this fantastical world, literally a world that sits on turtle and
and the
um yeah, and so obviously fantastical, yet he could really drill down and get to the heart of the matter.
yeah,
And that's the great thing about fiction, fantasy especially, is
yeah,
that you can in painting this magical world, you can really get down to the core of the human experience, which doesn't, if you try to articulate that, it doesn't sound like that should make sense, but
yeah.
anyone who's a fan of fantasy can nod their head and like, yes, that's exactly what fantasy
I
does.
totally agree. Yeah, and
Yeah.
many authors do that, not just Pratchett.
Of
Ursula Le
course, yeah.
Guin, Patricia McKillop, just
Yeah.
so many luminaries of the space.
Right. So the Teller of Small Fortunes, was that your first book published?
It was, yeah. It was
Okay.
actually also my first book written.
What that was going to be my question because a lot of authors and I find this interesting because authors typically fall into one of two camps where this is concerned. Uh, People will write a book and either be able to sell that book or to if they self-publish for it to find readers, um, or that book is not successful, so they go back and they rewrite it and then try to resubmit it, try to sell it. If
Yeah,
it's not successful, then they go back and they just keep working on this one story until it is ready.
yeah,
Whereas the other people will not find success with that book, abandon it, go write something completely different.
yeah,
And they'll keep doing that process until, either they become better writers or the market changes or whatever it is that needs to change.
yeah.
Di- how, were you immediately able to sell Teller? Was there a lot of revision that went into it? Tell us the origin story of that book.
Yeah, so I was really, really lucky in a myriad of ways. As
Yeah.
I'm sure you and a lot of the listeners know, the road to getting a book published is an uncertain one, and there are kind of all of these roadblocks
Yes.
at every stage where you
Roadblocks,
could be faced with
potholes, speed
rejection. Yes,
bumps. Yeah.
detour, speed bumps, the
Yeah.
road actually isn't a road and it leads off a cliff. Um,
Yeah. And the speed bumps are actually dead bodies that you don't know that until,
yeah, the dead bodies of other writers who've gone before.
exactly.
But so when I look back, now that I know all of these things about publishing, I
Hmm.
look back and I'm like, man, I was so lucky. And that's not to say I'm not proud of the Teller Small Fortunes because I
Yeah.
am, but I think there's not always a direct correlation between how good a book is and whether or
Hmm.
not it gets sold and gets published. So for me, The Tell of Small Fortunes, it was the first book that I wrote. And like I mentioned, it was something that I wrote kind of for me as a personal thing. And it was only after I drafted it that I was like, oh, maybe I should look into what it takes to get published. And so I learned you need to get a literary agent if you want to be traditionally published instead of self-published. And so I was like, okay, then you query literary agents and maybe you get rejected at that point. Okay,
Yeah.
let's give that a shot. I'm going to expect nothing, but go for it.
Sure.
So I started querying agents, and I ended up getting offers from 3 different literary agents from great agencies. I chose my current agent, Paul Lucas, who was with Jinkler and Nesbitt at the time, and he's just a fantastic agent, which I feel like already improved my odds for the next stage, which is submission when you try to sell the book to publishers. So we went out on submission, and I kept telling myself, tamp down your expectations. It'd be a dream to have a book published with a big publisher, but maybe it won't happen, and that's okay. I already got this far. I got an agent.
Yeah.
We were really lucky. And 6 days, I think, after going out on submission, we got our first request from one of the editors we submitted to that said, hey, we like the book. We want to schedule a call. And so
You're breathing rarefied air at this point.
Yeah. And I can go into why I think we were so
Okay.
fortunate. And I think there were external circumstances as well. But we got that offer. And then my agent sort of went out to the other editors and said, looks like we're going to have a competitive situation. We went to auction. We got offers from a number of Big 5 publishers, and it sold in a 2-book deal, and it's been kind of a dream ever since then. I think part of why it resonated and why I was able to find a home so quickly is what you were saying at the beginning, Hank, about cozy fantasy, which I agree with you, by the way. I don't think it's a new concept. I don't think anybody invented cozy fantasy in the last
not
few
at all.
years. I think we just slapped a name on it, and
I think it says more about marketing than it does about fantasy or any subgenres. But we can. I didn't mean to cut you off, but
no, not at all. I agree with you. I think a lot of it probably credit goes to Travis Baldree for the huge success of Legends and Lattes.
Sure.
Where everybody was like, that is what we want to call cozy fantasy, and
yeah.
So I think cozy fantasy was sort of having a moment, and publishers were seeing how much books like Legends and Lattes or The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana, how well they were doing, and saying, okay, there's clearly demand for this, especially, again, this was COVID. The world was falling apart around us. When things are stressful and dark and dire kind of around you, there's this flight towards comfort, which is something I experienced myself, right? Like it was my dad being sick that made me want to write something warm and whimsical and comforting. And so the publishers were probably looking to acquire books that were in this cozy fantasy realm. And I think my book just kind of struck a nerve at the right moment, at the right time. And I think also, maybe this is more speculation on my part, but cozy fantasy, I hate to say it, it's super white. A lot of the books in cozy fantasy, other than
as a white man, I can't disagree with you. I get it.
And I think things are changing, which is great. And Sangu Mandana was a trailblazer. And I think there's also a lot of translated fiction that fits into the cozy fantasy realm. But a lot of the books that were kind of bigger in the Western market were white. And I think I wrote The Teller of Small Fortunes in part because I wanted a character in fantasy that looked like me and had experiences like an immigrant background like me. And, I like to think that kind of added something a little bit fresh and a little bit novel to Teller that made it, able to find its home.
Yeah. Were you aware of quote unquote cozy fantasy as you were writing this? I'm trying to remember when Travis's series first came out, and because it just feels like it just appeared on the market one day and everyone flocked to it. It was like, oh, this is a thing now. And then when you start reading it, you're like, oh, well, Robert Jordan did this in The Wheel of Time. Yes, there was a kind of an epic scope to the story, but the sub stories, the subplots, very cozy in a lot of ways. Where we've talked about before that Robert Jordan would spend 3 pages describing the buttons on a dress. If that's not cozy, I don't know what is. That's like the absence of plot and really the vibes of the setting. So this is something that fantasy has done forever because people buy these big doorstops of books because they want to get into the world and just live there. And there's epic kind of battles and stuff that go on, but that's not the whole book. So kind of were you aware of this subgenre and that people were kind of latching on to this, or was this just the story you wanted to tell and there just happened to be a subgenre that emerged that this book fit right into.
I think it was also that's so funny that your point about the Wheel of Time. I've never thought of the Wheel of Time as being cozy before, but now I'm like, like you're
Yeah,
right. There are some
yeah,
cozy moments
it
in there.
kind of is,
In between
and
all the end of the world and so on.
yeah, and in the middle of that series, there are, I think, 4 books.
Hmm.
I'm not, and the fandom will
Yeah,
correct me, I'm sure, where they literally call the slog because they say that there's just not a lot of plot stuff that happens, and you have
yeah,
to get through those books to get to the end. And
yeah,
some people are like, but I love the slog. That's where I want to live forever. That's cozy fantasy.
yeah. That's really funny.
Yeah.
Um, I guess for me it was a little bit of both. So I knew cozy fantasy was a thing because, like I said, my dad was sick and I was looking for comfort first in binge
Right.
reading, and I was binge reading cozy fantasy or books that I found to be cozy, whether or not other people call them cozy fantasy or not.
Yeah.
So like Marie Brennan's The Memoirs of Lady Trent, everything T. Kingfisher has ever written,
Mm,
even rereading, the Discworld books I think are cozy,
yeah.
like Diana Wynne Jones. All those things to me are kind of, and then Sangu Mandana, Travis Baldree. I discovered those books and read them as well. Olivia Atwater, and it was running out of books like those that prompted me to say, "Hey, I should write my own." So I knew that that subgenre existed and was kind of emergent because I was a reader of it at the time and was craving more of those things. I didn't know the extent to which it was kind of this like untapped pool in the book market at the
Yeah.
time, and so that caught me off guard. I did not expect to get an agent as quickly as I did. I did not expect to go to auction and be bought for a significant amount of money by a big 5 publisher, and all the other kind of good things, the Fairy Loot, the Owl Crate, the Book of the Month. Did not expect any of that, which I think is very helpful in publishing to have low or non-existent expectations and then only let yourself be pleasantly surprised when good things happen.
Sure. Yeah. Um, if you were to explain the genre of
Yeah.
cozy fantasy to someone, what are the hallmarks of it that maybe separate it from epic fantasy
Yeah.
or the sword and sorcery? Where we kind of have this idea that you're gonna have an unsuspecting hero who's gonna come into conflict with this evil force that's trying to end the world. What separates that sort of fantasy from like the keeper of magical things?
Yeah. So first off, I'll caveat that I think the definition of cozy fantasy is a moving target. It's something that's
Of
nebulous
course.
and inherently subjective. So
Yeah.
I can give you what I think is my definition of cozy fantasy. But
Sure.
cozy, if you think about that word, it's about how it makes you feel, which means different people will feel different things in
Right.
response to different parts of the book. And so I think it can mean different things for different people, and that's okay. But my definition of cozy fantasy is it is smaller stakes than epic fantasy or sword and sorcery. So just like you're saying, generally in cozy fantasy, it's not going to be about the end of the world. There's not going to be serious risk of your main characters dying or facing some like traumatic events. It's generally going to be something with a happy ending, and it wants to evoke feelings of warmth and comfort and optimism in the reader. There's often a focus on kind of slice of life elements,
Right.
which kind of like you're talking about the slog, right? But it's like your characters sitting around a campfire, eating a meal at a tavern, doing the laundry, these kind of small everyday things that don't normally make it onto the page in epic fantasy, I guess, unless it's Wheel of Time and they're in the slog. Um, but it's kind of like it's more about the journey as opposed to the destination, is how I'd say. And so cozy fantasy tends to be more character driven than plot driven. It lingers over these moments of kind of comfort. There's often a theme of found family or of community building.
Hmm.
Um, and I think there has to be inherently optimism and kindness at its heart. Like, I don't think you can have a cynical cozy fantasy. It could be snarky, it could be funny, but I don't think that a cozy fantasy can seriously adopt the mindset of people being inherently cruel or evil or anything like that, because that's not cozy. And frankly, I don't think it's true either. Cozy fantasy
Yeah.
chooses to shine a light on the kinder aspects of humanity or whatever other species are in your book.
Doesn't mean that you can't have a side character
Yes.
that has those qualities
Yeah.
and and really kind of plays off of the inherent goodness of your main character when that's something interesting I've seen in cozy fantasy is you can have some of those elements, but they're definitely not the thrust of the story.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me about in the Keeper Magical Things, Certainty Bull Rush. Where did this character come from?
Yeah, so, a little bit of context for those who haven't read the book yet.
Yeah.
The book Keeper of Magical Things is about two women who are mages or members of the Guild of Mages in this fantasy kingdom. One, Certainty Bulrush, the main character, she's a novice mage, which means she hasn't quite graduated to the next level of magehood, and she's been stuck at novice level because her magic isn't very powerful, unlike those of her peers. All she can do, really, is talk to physical objects and convince them to make very, very small changes. So she's not like a battle mage. She can't like hurl fireballs. She can't cast spells like everybody else. She could just like talk to the
Well, she
log.
could push a salt shaker around a little
She
bit.
could push a salt shaker around, but you could also do that with your hands. So
Right.
and so she's a very kind person. She wants to be helpful. She comes from a farming family, and because she's a member of the Guild of Mages, her family kind of depends on her for potentially becoming a full-fledged mage and helping better the family's circumstances. So she's got a younger brother who wants to become an apprentice, and they need, money to pay for the apprenticeship, and she's kind of their best bet. So she feels a lot of pressure, but it's self-imposed pressure. And she ultimately just wants to be helpful to everybody around her and wants to prove herself and be worthwhile and be valuable to the guild and so on. But she's hampered in doing so by her magic. The origin for this character. So I think coming out of The Teller of Small Fortunes, I knew I wanted to write a book that focused a little bit more on the Guild of Mages, in part because I'm a sucker for light academia, dark academia, all those things, and having this like elite hierarchical institution of learning and magic. I wanted to figure out what are the characters in there and, what are their challenges and their goals. And obviously, as a main character, you often want an underdog. And so, especially in Cozy. And so Certainty, I knew I wanted her to be an underdog in the sense that her magic wasn't good enough for her to, be the next level of mage in The Keeper of Magical Things. And then there's a second character, Aurelia Morellin, who's basically Certainty's polar opposite in many ways. She is a very powerful mage. She comes from a rich family. She is very kind of like pretty and polished and put together. And I knew those two characters, I wanted them to kind of be foils to each other and have journeys that end up in a similar place in terms of discovering self-worth and, valuing themselves not just by others' expectations, but coming from such different origins and kind of meeting in the middle. And so that was kind of where those two characters come from. They're also both, like all characters are, a little bit an amalgamation of the writer's, background. And so I feel like there's a little bit of myself in both Certainty and Aurelia. There's the insecurity of never being good enough that I'm sure all of us have felt. It's kind of a universal thing coming from Certainty, this question of the imposter syndrome, basically, that we all feel in school or work, whatever. That is Certainty. And then from Aurelia, I was the younger sister of a very overachieving older sister who's like valedictorian and all these things. And so I kind of put a lot of that into Aurelia. So they're both two facets, I would say, of, myself.
I love that. And I love that your description of cozy fantasy is that it's more character driven and not necessarily plot forward like a lot of fantasy is, where you start describing a fantasy book in terms of how the world is going to end and how they're going to save it from it. Whereas cozy is more about how this character grows into what she, always was meant to be or whatever. You said earlier that you had like 4 different endings for Keeper. Were those 4 different endings that were informed by plot, or 4 different endings that were informed by character growth?
That's a really good question. I think it's more plot. So what happened is that I wrote a first draft, and being a very impatient person, my last quarter of my drafts are always a little bit half-baked when I first write them, because I kind of sprint to the end.
Sure.
Which means afterward in revisions, you go back and you're like, all right, I got to like shore this up and fix it.
Right.
And so it was during the editing process with my wonderful editors, Jess Wade at Ace and Molly Powell at Harderscape, that Jess very helpfully pointed out that certain things just didn't make sense. My scaffolding of plot was a little too wobbly for the ending to land. And I had left a few too many loopholes. And so I guess I needed to close those loopholes and add some more logic to certain things so that the plot made a bit more sense. And in so doing, the ending naturally changed a few times.
Gotcha.
I think the characters' endings, the ending of the character arcs, they always end in a similar place. Like that was consistent from the first draft.
If people think that cozy fantasy is all about vibes and feelings and that nothing actually happens, what would you what would you use to sell cozy fantasy and your book specifically,
Yeah.
to someone who is a fantasy reader but is not sure about this new cozy thing that it feels like is coming at us from every direction? What would you tell the traditional fantasy reader that tells them, it's okay to come over and pick up a cozy book?
I think I would say, even though I said that cozy fantasy has smaller stakes, lower stakes than epic fantasy or other forms of fantasy, it doesn't mean that there are no stakes. The difference is
Mm,
that the stakes are personal to the character. So it's not about, can I save the world and everyone in it from dying a horrible death, but
right.
it might be, can I save my family business, or can I save my career, and can I save the small community around me? Can I save my relationship with these people? That kind of thing. And if you think about it, I would argue that those things are truer to our own experiences.
Yes.
We are not
Yes.
on an everyday basis trying to save the well, I'm not. Maybe you are, Hank.
No,
Uh,
no, I haven't had to save the planet this week at all.
yep, maybe next week.
Yeah.
But the things that are most important to us
Yeah.
are those kinds of stakes. And if you think about how those things have made you feel in your life, you have felt strongly about them. They matter to you, and they matter to
Right.
these characters too. As long as you can believe that these stakes are true to this character, then that's something that hopefully will draw you in and keep you, compelled by the journey. But I'll also say that, if cozy fantasy isn't your thing, if you need the end of the world stakes and you're a big epic fantasy reader, I also love epic fantasy, to be clear.
Yeah.
Like, that's okay too. You don't have to love everything that people put out there. And, people, where I won't be offended if you decide that cozy fantasy isn't your thing, but give it a shot, maybe. I would describe it as if you play video games and you like doing side quests, think
Mm,
about cozy fantasy as a book for those who love side quests.
I love it. That's probably the best description of cozy fantasy that I've heard so far. Julie, I know it's release day for you and you've got a busy day. So thank you for taking time to join us today. But if we know anything about publishing, The Keeper of Magical Things has probably been off your desk for several months now while it goes through the publishing process. What are you working on now?
Yeah, so my next book, knock on wood, is actually not a cozy fantasy. It's a little bit
Okay.
more the epic direction. It is about a monster hunter in a Asian influenced fantasy world, who is secretly a dragon and secretly rescues some of the monsters that she is hunting.
Take my money. I'm in. I'm in. Great. Julie, well, The Keeper of Magical Things is on sale everywhere today. Go grab it from your local bookstore. Support local bookstores. If you don't have a great local bookstore, we'll put links to it in the show notes where you can grab it from Amazon or Audible. I'm assuming I haven't gotten to check out the audiobook yet. Have
Yeah.
you heard any of the production of it so far?
Yeah, it's really good. I'm
Okay.
not normally an audiobook listener, but we have Natalie Naudis narrating the audiobook, and she is
Ooh,
fantastic.
yeah.
Did such a good job. So everybody I've heard from who has listened to the audiobook loved it.
I love it. I love it. We'll put a link where you can grab it from Audible as well. Julie, if folks are just discovering you and want to dig into all the great stuff you're up to, follow along for new news or dig into your back catalog, where's a good place for them to follow you online?
Yeah, you could find me at www.julieleong.com, or I'm on Instagram at Julie Leong Books.
Excellent. We'll link that up as well to make it easier for folks to find you. Julie, this has been so much fun chatting. Thank you for taking time to come on the show
Thank you so
today.
much for having me on. This was great.
All right.